Hello and welcome to everybody tuning in. My name is Uroš Ilić and I work as Office Coordinator at the IREX Implemented Media Innovation Activity Project jointly funded by USAID and CEDA. Over the past 10 years, IREX President and CEO Kristin Lord has been using her extensive experience to drive organizational transformation and growth. During her 5-week tour of European country offices, Ms. Lord visited Belgrade and the Western Balkan region at a very specific time when the Western Balkans are undergoing huge transformational development and change. But they are also facing new threats. Kristin, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Belgrade.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back.
How's Belgrade treating you so far?
It's been terrific. It's been energizing to see our team here and meet with some of our partners. I was last in Belgrade in 2019, and the city's changed a lot. It's very dynamic and vibrant, and there's a lot of exciting activity happening in the media sector.
Absolutely. I was just about to say 2019 almost feels like a lifetime ago. It's a completely different age. The world has changed so much. So I'm glad you recognize Belgrade's changing as well. I mean, your career has been nothing short of an international relations major dream. So I would really like to know, how did you get your start? Are there things that you would do differently? What are some key takeaways that you can tell us from your start? And what are some advice that you can give to young international relations professionals?
So the most important message I always tell people when I get asked this question is that it was all an accident and I did not have a plan. And yet I have had an amazing career and I wouldn't change anything, even the really hard bits. But I think then that means the biggest piece of advice I would give to an international relations major is please don't think you have to have your whole career figured out when you're 22 years old or younger. Also, if anyone had asked me to predict at any stage in my career what I would do next, I could have had 100 guesses and been wrong. I never was able to predict. But I do think one thing I did well was jumping through windows of opportunity when they opened and being willing to take a leap and do something different. Sometimes I was forced to do something different because of some kind of crisis. And it still worked out okay. And I learned a lot, and I have great relationships, friendships, professional relationships with people along the way. And I always feel now that young people feel like they have to have everything planned out, and they look at people and people have these perfectly curated lives on social media. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, at least my life has not been like that. Most people I know don't have lives like that. And so it's okay if it's messy and you figure things out, and maybe things will emerge that you never thought of. And that can be good and exciting. So enjoy the ride.
And out of all of your previous experiences, which one would you say prepared you for your role at IREX the most?
I have no idea. I mean, all of them together. It's really funny you ask me this because I had a dream recently, and I told my husband this, and he told me, you have really boring dreams. And the dream was that somebody was asking me if my job at IREX was the hardest job I ever had. And I said, well, it might be hard in some ways because I have more responsibility and it's a bigger organization, but it's also not as hard as other jobs because I at least feel better equipped. And I got so thrown into the deep end on so many jobs that I think they were harder because I wasn't equipped. And so I think when you ask about is a job is hard, is it objectively hard? And also, how well prepared are you to deal with it? And not necessarily you yourself, but I have so many wonderful people I can call on for advice, who I trust, who I can turn to. And there are times in your career where you don't have that, and that makes everything harder.
Understood. Youth empowerment has been one of your top priorities here at IREX. I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges, in your opinion, that young people face across the world? And what is IREX doing to help youth contribute to a more just and prosperous world?
So what I hear from youth around the world is that just give us a seat at the table. If things are going to affect me, let me be involved. Let us have a say. And also, youth don't want to be told, you're a leader someday, you're a leader of the future. Youth want to hear, we think you can lead now. And we want to give you an opportunity to lead now. And we recognize we have things to learn and we want to learn, but we don't want to just sit around and wait for 20 or 30 years. So that's something I really hear. And I think one of the things we can do at IREX and have done and are doing is to really help youth get those opportunities, give them the skills and the networks and the knowledge and the confidence and the experience so that when they do have those opportunities, they can make the most of it. And then also really encourage them when they do get those opportunities to use them in ways that give back to others, to be that servant leader, that leader who's serving others and thinks beyond themselves. And I'm really proud to say that around the world, IREX has a fantastic record of doing this. It's probably our proudest contribution.
Understood. You mentioned confidence in young people as a kind of like a pillar for engaging in leadership positions. How do we cultivate that better?
I think part of it comes through experience. Most people lack confidence because they don't know what they can do. They don't know what they're capable of. And so I think you can tell people all day long, you're great, you're swell, but they're only going to believe it if they get a chance to practice. Absolutely. And to see that they may not know something, and then maybe they even fail, but then they can overcome it and do better. And then they learn that they can go through a process like that where they don't have to be perfect every time, but they get better. I think that's what gives people confidence. So I think mostly confidence comes from being out there in the world, not necessarily just by getting lots of applause and moral support. And not that applause and moral support isn't important, but I think what builds true confidence, honest confidence, is just real life experience. And support networks. I think it makes a lot to have the experience, but know it's a safe, that other people are there to help you along.
In a sense of emotional support, just along the way, not necessarily hands-on support?
Yeah, that's what I meant by support, actually.
Right,
Thank you for clarifying, is that knowing that there are people there who are invested in your success that you can turn to, and even just people they can confide in and talk to. All of us need that. We're human.
Naturally. Since I started working in IREX roughly 2 years ago, a bit more than that, I noticed a gradual increase in efforts to make IREX as a whole a more cohesive community. So good examples of that would be the all-encompassing staff survey that we had a while back, also the professional exchange initiatives. How do we continue this positive trend and ensure that IREX is more connected and that people feel like a part of a community, a family?
So I feel like we've had some improvements and some challenges in this regard. And one thing that really helped us, ironically, was the pandemic. I feel that although, for instance, our big office in the United States is a little less connected because so many people are working remotely and aren't in the office, globally, I feel like IREX is better connected and networked than ever. And it's not a country office to Washington, D.C., where our headquarters is, but it's from country office to country office. It is so common now for me to be on a call or in a meeting and have people from multiple countries, and nobody even thinks about it. It's just, Tuesday. Because that's how life is now. We can have an online brown bag or a session, and we'll have people there from all over the world interacting on an equal level. Everybody is the same size box on the screen, and it just wasn't possible to have that level of organic collaboration on a daily basis until we had the pandemic. And it really told us all that overnight we could use Microsoft Teams and we could have real interaction at all levels. It was transformative, and it let us also have senior management team members around the world. We weren't able to pull that off before, or at least we didn't have the confidence we could pull it off. But as soon as the pandemic showed us we could do this, we could have senior management team members, executive team members who were sitting on different continents from each other. And I think that was really helpful. So that technological connection. The thing pulling against the greater connection, which I think we always wanted, is remote work. I think more and more people work remotely. Also, IREX has grown tremendously. We're more dispersed. I think the conditions our staff are working under in so many countries around the world are just make it very challenging for people to engage. And that engagement takes a lot of effort. when there's people are so far flung and people are remote and are dealing with so many challenges and are working so hard. So I think that's actually a constant struggle. And I was recently in Central America, and a staff member said to me, I really want to go to staff meetings and brown bags and participate in all these things, but I also have a really demanding job, and I also don't want to be at work 24 hours a day. So I'm finding that a really hard balance. And I felt I had a really poor answer to that person. I said, well, we all have to do the best we can, because I think that's part of modern work life, is trying to make sure that we're happy with how we're allocating our time, or satisfied with how we're allocating our time. We're spending our time on the right things. And part of that is to make the time to engage with colleagues. And I'll end with this. I'm always encouraging my younger colleagues to make the time to come into the office and get to know people. And they don't want to come in. They want to be able to walk their dog at lunchtime. They don't want to have to commute. They don't want to have to buy their lunch near the office. It's very convenient. They're used to working in their slippers and sweatpants, and they don't want to have to, wear something different. But I think, and I don't, at the risk of sounding like an old fogey, I think there's something that gets lost when people don't come in and get to know each other. It's lost professionally, because you learn a lot just by being around people, watching how they interact, talking to them informally, getting to know them as real people. You don't get to know the people who are outside your immediate sphere. You don't know your peers. And I think young people consistently undervalue their peers as professional resources. And the last thing I'll say is, I've made a lot of friends through work, and they weren't the people I was in the most meetings with. And so when I look back, the number of friends I made through work, I think it may have exceeded the number of friends I made through other sources. And so I want this for people. I want them to have a rewarding experience, but it does make it harder to have that engagement when you're facing all the different pressures I mentioned. But technology is a plus.
I would agree with that. In 2018, you wrote about the importance of human-based media solutions for social innovation review for Stanford. The fall in trust in mainstream media resulted in this rise of individual spokespeople and analysts, people that my generation would call influencers mostly. How do we ensure, because they do have such an impact on youth and on their opinions and how they view the world, how do we ensure that these influencers are held accountable for their spoken word? Or are we perhaps better served by educating their listeners? And is there a red pill, blue pill solution here?
So I personally am a believer in freedom of expression. So unless people are violating the terms of whatever platform they are, or violating the rights of others, I find it very hard to, quote unquote, hold people accountable for speech, if you believe in those values. Thus, I think it's on the rest of us to counter with speech and with our own behavior anything that we find objectionable. So that can be by voting with your feet and going another direction. You don't have to listen. You can voice a counter opinion. You can organize people to speak out together. But I don't see many good options that don't embrace censorship that holds influencers accountable. And that puts us in a tricky position, because I don't like everything that I hear, but I really believe in people having the freedom to speak and to express themselves. So that unfortunately means that you have to accept some things that you really don't like. And I actually don't think freedom of expression is a very popular opinion right now, but I still think it's a fundamental human right.
Absolutely. I would greatly agree with you. I think freedom of expression is under threat, and especially among my generation, which has become so sensitive and at some even points desensitized to other people's opinion that they prefer even not to hear it. But I'm sure you understand why I had to ask you this question. There's a bunch of young IREXers that feel like influencers are maybe going too far. Some feel like they're not going far enough. And this is a reality that my generation will have to adjust to. In August of 2022, USAID's Samantha Power emphasized the importance of locally led action for international development. IREX country offices certainly do enjoy a degree of decision-making power and implementation power. What does localization mean to you, and how do we implement it further, if at all?
So what locally led development means to me is people who are closest to the people being served educating others on the context, having decision-making, authority and power, having agency, having input. What it doesn't mean to me personally is whose name is on the check.
Could you elaborate that?
Yeah, and what I mean by that is there's a big debate now over, do organizations need to register locally, or who's a local organization? And I heard recently about a Tanzanian organization. There's Tanzania. They only work in Tanzania. They were started by Tanzanians, for Tanzania. But in order to get access to a certain charity grant, they registered in the U.S. And then they were told that they couldn't receive money from another organization because they had this U.S. registration. I find this to be completely meaningless. And where organizations are registered and whose name is on the check. And, I just think it's a very bureaucratic, legalistic way to look at what should be about power, about agency, about the value of local knowledge, about the value of long-term relationships. And so I really would love to see us not spin around so much on the legalistic, bureaucratic elements of localization and spend more on what I think are the true values. I'll say another couple of things that are controversial. I also think we need to make sure that localization does not become a trap for people. When I was in Africa last year, one thing I heard from Kenyan colleagues was they started to notice a disturbing trend where people were questioning their authority or decision-making ability because they work for an international nonprofit. And the assumption was, well, you couldn't possibly be a leader because, you're local and you work for an international organization. They're like, well, not only do I have decision-making authority, I'm not just responsible for what happens in Kenya. I actually happen to have, global responsibilities. And similarly, people don't want to be told you're only valuable to us for what you can contribute in this one small community that you're from. I think people do care about that. They do want to make a contribution to places that they're from, but they also would like access to global networks. They also would like the privilege of having global impact. So I think we need to value both global networks, global impact, learning from each other, while also recognizing these values of really hard-earned local knowledge, trusting relationships, local context, giving those people the power. I think an interesting combination of globally connected, globally impactful, global sharing, but also locally led. To me, that's kind of a magic combination, but I feel like it drops out of a lot of the discussions about localization. It almost feels like the more local and small, the better. Well, sometimes, but not always.
Right. The intricate marriage between development internationally and obviously bureaucratic processes is something that we cannot separate, naturally, because we owe it to our donors, various taxpayers, to be accountable and use their funds appropriately. But how do we strike a balance between being accountable and organizational and developmental efficiency, if at all?
I mean, I don't think we have a choice but to be accountable to our donors, because what's the alternative? Being unaccountable? But I do think there is a movement in philanthropy towards trust-based philanthropy, and I do think there's some valuable insights there, even though I think we'll never be able to head in that direction fully for any organization that's accepting taxpayer dollars, nor should they. I think taxpayers want to have and should have some accountability for how their tax dollars are being spent, I think we can also take some lessons from trust-based philanthropy, where it does focus on longer term results, take the time to build relationships, because it has better impact. We know that has better impact. Is less concerned with tiny milestones and bookkeeping than about impact. I mean, I think there are some lessons to learn there, and I think taxpayers would appreciate that too. Taxpayers would like results. So when we talk about accountability, we should also talk about accountability for what? I mean, I remember some cases even at IREX where we had people driving around a large country to get a $10 receipt because someone had bought had to get a tire changed or something while they were on the road, and the receipt wasn't good enough, and they had to spend like 2 days driving to get the receipt and drive it back. Well, personally, I would have preferred that they probably spent, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars worth of staff time to make sure we had a $10 receipt. My numbers on this example aren't exactly right, but the point remains. I think we can take these things to a crazy extent, where I would have rather that person spent their time getting development results for taxpayers, rather than nothing else matters if you don't have your $10 receipt for the tire change. So it's admittedly a tricky balance, because trust is partly about being able to show that you're a good steward of taxpayer dollars, but trust also and accountability also means getting real results. And real results are development results, not perfect documentation. We do have a perfect audit this year, by the way, so I'm not trying to make excuses.
Last question. While the Western Balkans have made significant progress in terms of democracy, stability, economic development, the region remains somewhat unsettled. Will IREX look to increase its efforts in the region in the future?
Yeah, I really hope we can. I mean, we really want to see the countries of the region, including Serbia, be successful, be vibrant. And we really want, especially all people, but especially young people, to feel like they have a future here. And my understanding is that not all Serbian young people feel that way, and that many are leaving. And so wouldn't it be a great thing for our IREX team, but also just more broadly for people to feel like they were investing in communities where people really felt they had opportunities to stay. And if we could be part of that, that would be very rewarding.
Well, just from my part, I think the fact that a country office coordinator at 26 on his first job, getting an opportunity to interview the president and CEO of our organization speaks volumes to what kind of organization IREX is and what kind of organization it strives to be. Thank you for all the hard work you do. Thank you for your time once again. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. And you're a far better podcaster than I am, so I don't know why you shouldn't have that opportunity. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear listeners. I hope that today's conversation enforced some of your existing opinions, made you question others, and informed you about the work of international organizations and international development. Until next time.